Have you ever heard someone who has who's just had really a tough time? I mean, life has just kind of either turned upside down or a series of things have happened and they haven't been for their good, or at least it doesn't feel like, and they're getting really frustrated and they're really discouraged. And at some point, they begin to wonder about God. They begin to wonder, is he real? Is he listening? Is this all really true? Anybody ever known anybody like that, or maybe have you been like that? I don't know that I've ever been at the point where I've really gone to that length, but I think I've been close a time or two, where things are just simply not working at all, and doesn't seem to be an answer, and it gets even worse than it had been when I was feeling like that, and you begin to wonder, why isn't he answering? Anybody ever thought about that? And in the book of Hebrews, we've been making this point over and over again, that the writer of the book of Hebrews is talking to people who have become Christians, but they're really tired and they're really weary. And when you get tired and you get weary and you begin to question things, you end up sometimes going back to the way you were. And I suspect that some of us have had children in that same situation. I think Susan and I have had children that have been very close to a point where they have wondered, is this really real? And I can remember one of them at least looking at me and saying, well, where do you get that in the Bible? And on a couple of those subjects, I had to say, well, I'm not sure it's there. I got to think about this one for a moment. And so they were searching and they were questioning and they can't quite figure it out. And so they begin to wonder. And I'm wondering if that's not what's happening in the section of Scripture that we're in right now in the book of Hebrews. I don't know, because I don't understand this passage very well. But I've tried to think about it for the last few days and think, why is it here? What's happening? So if you look at chapter 6 and verse 10, just one phrase that the writer of the book of Hebrews will make, he says, God is not unjust. Now, why would anybody make a statement like that? Why would you have to make a statement to people to tell them that God is not unjust?
Because they were questioning their...
Yeah, it seems that they may have been questioning, is God really a just God? Because it doesn't seem that he's on my side right now. He's supposed to be on my side. We talk about him being on our side. We say that all things work together for good for those who are called and who live according to his purpose. We say that, but it doesn't feel like it sometimes. And yet the writer comes back and says, I want to tell you, God is just. He's just. He's not unjust. He's just. But sometimes you and I don't feel like it. I think there are people there right now in our country and in our world. There are people who don't understand the Russia-Ukraine thing. There are people who don't understand the activism that's going on in our country. And I'm trying to be careful how I talk about that, but I now have a new conclusion on that no problem can be solved in the extremes. That no problem can ever be solved in the extremes. So if you're in the extreme over here on the far, far right of whatever the issue is, or you're in the extreme over here on the far, far left, no problem ever gets solved, because no one knows how to get to that center spot where we can have dialogue and talk and work our way through it. It's called compromise, that's right. It's called listening to one another. It's called thinking together through some issue. And our country is becoming more and more extreme on both ends, and we cannot seem to get anything solved. And a lot of people are frustrated. And in the meantime, when no one can get anything solved, what's happening to your gasoline prices and your diesel prices? And what's happening to your grocery prices? And at the same time, what's happening to your income? It's not going up. And there are a lot of people just feeling so very, very burdened and wondering, how is this all going to ever work out? And yet this writer says he's not unjust. He's not forgetting. Now I want you to go down to verse 13. When God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. Now, we often have trouble with that particular passage because Jesus will tell us in the Sermon on the Mount that we're not supposed to what? Don't swear, because you can just let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so we have sometimes taken that in a way to say you can never swear. God doesn't want you to swear. Jesus doesn't want you to swear. And yet here it says for God, there was no one greater to swear by. So he swore by himself. Interesting. And he said to Abraham, swearing by himself, using his own name, his own authority, I will surely bless you and give you many descendants. Well, that was a really beautiful, wonderful promise. Do you recall the problem with that promise? The number one major, overwhelming problem with that promise? It took a long time. It took a very, very long time. Now, how well do you do with a promise taking a long, long time? No, I don't do very well with it either. And let me ask you this. For you, how long is a long time? When you have to wait, you're waiting for something. How long is a long time?
Any length of time that's not right now.
Yeah, now that's exactly what Burke just said. Any length of time that's not immediate, that's not right now. And we have been programmed more and more by our culture to expect things immediately. With even that, though, I can get out of my emotional spot. Remember, when your emotions go up, your intellect does what? One of our principles we're talking all the time. When your emotions go up, your intellect goes down. So if you think with your emotions and if you act with your emotions, you're not going to look very smart and talk very smart. In fact, you're not going to be very smart. You can have an IQ way, way up there, but if your emotions get out of hand, it's not going to look like you've got an IQ at all. Okay. So what happens is when something goes on for a really long time, a year, or 2 years, or 3 years, and I'm waiting on this thing you promised for me, and 4 years, what do I tend to do at somewhere along that time spectrum? What do I tend to do? I doubt. Now that's a really good word. I doubt whether or not it's really ever going to happen. And as I doubt, I get afraid that it's not going to happen. And when you get those two things going, what other kind of emotion sometimes gets going?
Take care of it yourself.
All right, I want to try to take care of myself.
You quit waiting.
I quit waiting. I take care of myself.
You lose faith.
I lose faith. And sometimes I just get angry. You told me you were going to do this, and I came back to see you last year, and it still didn't happen. I came back this year and it still didn't happen. I came back again this third year and it still didn't happen. And I'm getting really put out with this. I've had about all this I want. Is that not how we are? It says God made a promise to Abraham. And it took a long time. He'd have many descendants. In fact, it took 25 years. Now, 25 years out of my life is a very long time. 25 years from now, I won't even need a haircut. And we're not going to be worried about the cost of it. We're not going to be worried about this, how long it is, unless it keeps growing when I'm somewhere else, But I don't plan to be somewhere else. I plan to be burned up, but that's my deal. So, 25 years is a long time. And yet, Abraham waited patiently. Now, if you read the story, if you really read the account, how patient was he really? How patient was he really? I mean, there are times when Abraham will look up at God and say, you giving me all this wealth? Read Genesis 15. You giving me all this wealth? I'm going to have to give it to that servant kid over there. I don't have anybody to give it to. It's going to be that servant kid over there. And God says, Abraham, I told you you would have a child. So Abraham says, okay, all right, I believe it. I'll go ahead. In fact, that's the place where it says it was counted to him for righteousness because he believed. Isn't it interesting? This rocks along for 25 years, but that wasn't the only problem. You remember some more years pass, and what does Sarah say about the deal?
She laughs.
Well, before she laughed, what did she say? What did Greg? What do we both say here? If you wait too long, you do what? You take matters into your own hands. And Sarah says, Abraham, I don't care what you're thinking. It's not going to work. I got this young girl over here who's been taking care of our house, our tent, for a long time. We're going to have a child this way. How'd that work out? That didn't work out so well. In fact, we're still feeling the pain of that today. We're still feeling the pain of that mistake today. Which reminds me to say that there are consequences for every one of our faithless decisions that may reach far beyond anything that we expected it to reach. Everybody got that? There are consequences for every one of our faithless decisions that may reach far beyond anything we ever thought could be possible. And that's the story of this boy that was born the way he was born. And so he says, so after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. Now men swear by someone greater than themselves. And the oath confirms what is said, and it puts an end to all arguments. I kind of wish we could go back to those days in some way. Because what he's saying is, back then, if you said something and you swore it with an oath, it was, we like to say, gospel, or it's true. Today, how much do we believe people? No, we have to hire these crazy lawyers. Today, we have to hire this fleet of crazy lawyers. And they review those documents and change those documents so that we try to tie up every possible loose end, and we make sure that nothing can possibly happen because people don't keep their word very well. Isn't that interesting? So men do that. Because, verse 17, God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised. He confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope offered to us may be greatly encouraged. Now, we have used that verse over and over again. It's impossible for God to what? Now, by these two things, it's proof that it's impossible for God to lie. What are the two things? Well, people debated for years, but I think the most common thought is the fact that he promised it and he confirmed that promise by his own oath, swearing by himself. Our takeaway is twofold. No matter what's going on, God is just. And secondly, no matter how long it takes, God always keeps his promise. That's our takeaway. And so we ought to be greatly encouraged. We ought to be greatly encouraged. But there are things going on right now that make it really hard for me to be greatly encouraged. I mean, I'm kind of encouraged a little bit. We got 8/10 of rain. But I want to tell you something. 2 days from now, after a couple more days of 100-degree weather and wind blowing really hard, I'm not sure our grass is going to grow. I'm not sure I might have to open the gates to my neighbor's field, whose name is Ghost, and turn our cows over there at nighttime and drive them back early in the morning. You know. So don't tell Ben, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. So it's, and yet at the same time, bottom line is God's just, keeps his promise, and I got to live like that. I got to be encouraged by that. I certainly don't want to give up on a God who's like this. Everybody okay?
That's what faith is. I mean,
That's
without a promise, I mean,
that's exactly what faith is. That's exactly what faith is. And God's not going to let you get out of this world with an easy walk of faith. Because if it's too easy, is it really faith? Are we really putting our trust in him?